So far in the story The Wind in the Willows, we've learned that Mr. Toad can be very irresponsible. He doesn't stick with one hobby for too long, and when his caravan crashed, he didn't even help Mole or Rat. He just went out and bought a motor car. So today, as we read this chapter of The Wind in the Willows, pay close attention to how Mr. Toad's actions relate to the themes. As a reminder, we've talked about the theme of responsibility, irresponsibility, friendship, loyalty, and hospitality. It was a bright morning in the early part of summer. The mole and the water rat had been up since dawn discussing the joys of boating. They were finishing breakfast when a heavy knock sounded at the door. The mole went to the door and the rat heard him utter a cry of surprise. Then he flung the door open and announced, "Mr. Badger!" The badger strode into the room and stood looking at the two animals with an expression full of seriousness. "The hour has come," said the badger at last. "What hour?" asked Rat uneasily, glancing at the clock on the mantelpiece. "Whose hour, you should say, rather," replied the badger. "Why, Toad's hour, the hour of Toad. I said I would take him in hand as soon as the winter was over, and I'm going to take him in hand today." "Toad's hour, of course," cried the mole delightedly. "It has been brought to my attention," continued the badger, taking an armchair, "that another new motor car will arrive at Toad Hall today. You two animals will accompany me to Toad Hall, and the work of rescue shall begin." "Right you are," cried the rat enthusiastically. They set off immediately on their mission of mercy. They reached Toad Hall to find a shiny new motor car parked in the driveway. As they neared the front door, it was flung open, and Mr. Toad, attired in his driving clothes, came swaggering down the steps. "Hello," he cried cheerfully. "You're just in time to come with me for a jolly." Toad's words faltered as he noticed the stern looks on the faces of his friends. The badger strode up the steps. "Take him inside," he said to his companions. Then, as Toad was hustled through the doors, he turned to the chauffeur in charge of the new motor car. "I'm afraid you won't be wanted today," he said. "Mr. Toad has changed his mind." With that, the badger followed the others inside and shut the door. "Now then," he said to the toad, when the four of them stood together in the hall, "take those ridiculous things off." "Shan't," replied the toad with great spirit. "Take them off him, then, you two," ordered the badger. They had to lay Toad out on the floor before they could get to work properly. Then the rat sat on him, and the mole got his motor clothes off him bit by bit. "You knew it must come to this, Toad," the badger explained. "You've disregarded all of the warnings we've given you. You've gone on squandering the money your father left you, and you're constantly getting into trouble with the police. You're getting us animals a bad name in the area. Now, you will come with me into the library, and there we will have a serious heart-to-heart." He took Toad firmly by the arm and led him into the library. After about 3/4 of an hour, the badger reappeared, solemnly leading by the paw a very dejected Toad. "Sit down there, Toad," said the badger kindly, pointing to a chair. "My friends," he went on, "I am pleased to inform you that Toad has seen the error in his ways." "That's very good news," said the mole gravely. "Very good news indeed," observed the rat dubiously. "If only—" He was looking very hard at Toad as he said this, and could not help thinking he perceived something like a twinkle in the animal's eye. "There is only one thing more to be done," continued the badger. "Toad, I want you to repeat before your friends here that you see the errors of your ways." There was a long, long pause. Toad looked desperately this way and that. At last he spoke. "No," he said quite firmly, "I admit nothing." "What?" cried the badger. "Didn't you tell me just now in there—" "Oh, yes, yes, in there," said the toad impatiently. "I'd have said anything in there. You're so persuasive, dear badger." "Then you don't promise," said the badger, "never to touch a motor car again?" "Certainly not," replied Toad. "Told you so," observed Rat to Mole. "Very well, then," said the badger firmly. "We'll have to see what force can do. You've often asked us three to come and stay with you, Toad. Well, now we're going to. Take him upstairs, you two, and lock him up in his bedroom. We'll take great care of everything till you're well, Toad, said the mole, as Toad was hauled up the stairs. No more of those regrettable incidents with the police, Toad, said the rat, as they thrust him into his bedroom and locked the door. They descended the stairs, Toad shouting abuse at them through the keyhole, and the three friends sat down to discuss the matter. Toad must never be left unguarded, said the badger firmly. The mole and the rat nodded in agreement. Toad They arranged watches accordingly. At first, Toad resisted their efforts, but as time passed, however, he appeared to grow depressed. One fine morning, the rat, whose turn it was to go on duty, went upstairs to relieve Badger. Toad's still in bed, Badger told the rat. Now, you look out, rat. When Toad's quiet and submissive, then he's at his trickiest. And with that warning, the Badger departed. How are you today? Inquired the rat cheerfully as he approached Toad. A feeble voice replied, Thank you so much, dear Ratty. So good of you to inquire. But first tell me how you are yourself, the excellent mole? Oh, we're all right, replied the rat. Mole, he added innocently, is going out for a run with Badger. Now jump up and don't lie moping there on a fine morning like this. Dear kind rat, murmured Toad, I can't jump up now, if ever. I hate being a burden, and I do not expect to be one much longer. Well, I hope not too, said the rat heartily. I'm a nuisance, I know, replied the toad. You are indeed, said the rat, but I tell you, I'd take any trouble on earth for you, if only you'd be a sensible animal. If I thought that, Ratty, murmured the toad, then I would beg you to fetch a doctor. Why? What do you want a doctor for? Inquired the rat. Surely you have noticed of late, murmured the toad. But no, why should you? Never mind. Forget I asked. Look here, said the rat, beginning to get worried. Of course I'll fetch a doctor if you really think you need one, but you can hardly be bad enough for that yet. Let's talk about something else. I fear, dear friend, said Toad, that talk can do little for me. And by the way, if you do fetch a doctor, would you mind fetching a lawyer too? Oh, a lawyer? Oh, gracious me, the concerned rat said to himself as he hurried from the room, not forgetting, however, to lock the door behind him. Outside, he stopped only for a moment to consider Toad's behavior before running off to the village on his errand of mercy. As the key turned in the lock, the toad hopped out of bed. Toad watched Rat from his window until he was out of sight. Laughing heartily, Toad dressed quickly in his best suit, filled his pockets with cash, and improvised a rope from knotting sheets from his bed together. Tying one end of the rope to the strongest part of his window, Toad slid lightly to the ground and, taking the opposite direction of the rat, marched off lightheartedly, whistling a merry tune. It was a gloomy luncheon for Rat when Badger and Mole returned. He did it awful well, said the crestfallen Rat. He did you awfully well, said the Badger hotly. He's got clear away for now. And the worst of it is, he'll be so conceited with what he's been able to do, but we'd better stay here. Toad may be brought back at any moment on a stretcher or between two policemen. Meanwhile, Toad was walking briskly along a main road. Smart piece of work, that, he remarked to himself. With this thought in mind, he strode along till he reached a little town where the sign of the Red Lion reminded him that he was hungry. He marched into the inn and ordered lunch. He was about halfway through his meal when a familiar sound made him jump. The glorious sound of a motor car could be heard in the inn yard. Before long, the owners of the motor car appeared in the inn. Eager to get a look at the vehicle, the toad slipped out and sauntered around to the inn yard. There cannot be any harm, he said to himself, in my just looking at it. The car stood in the middle of the yard. Toad walked slowly round it. I wonder if this sort of car starts easily, he said to himself. Next moment, hardly knowing how it came about, he was hurtling along in someone else's motor car. To my mind, observed the chairman of the bench of the magistrates, the only difficulty that presents itself is how we can sufficiently punish this rogue. He has been found guilty of stealing a motor car, of driving dangerously, and of gross impertinence to the rural police. Mr. Clerk, will you tell us what is the stiffest penalty we can impose on this villain? The clerk scratched his nose. Supposing you were to say 12 months for the theft, and 3 years for the furious driving, and 15 years for the cheek, those figures, if added together correctly, total up to 19 years. First rate, said the chairman. So you had better make it around 20 years, concluded the clerk. An excellent suggestion, said the chairman. Prisoner, it's going to be 20 years for you this time.